We're out here in Chicago, right in the middle of the city center. You can see that tower behind me, so you know where we're at. For the International Workers' Day May Day Parade. Its history ties back to the late 1800s in Chicago. One thing it does serve as a purpose for is a check-in with the national and the international global left movement. I'm Christopher Sweat, analyst at Graystack Media. We're out here live in Chicago. We're out here covering the protests. We're also going to hear from a number of the speakers in about an hour, which will be fascinating because it's going to give us an idea if the message is enough to reach a sort of consolidated collective interest. My assumption and the article that I put out last night is that the movement is moving towards a sort of new nationalism after October 7th, and it's going to struggle to consolidate into a single bloc to oppose Donald Trump. And on top of that, what it's done is it has marginalized the Palestinian liberation interest in favor of domestic political interest. So it's almost mirroring the same right that it critiques. And as you've seen through a lot of the footage that we've already gathered so far, there's 10,000 different messages and 10,000 different ways that this group is communicating.
Before it became a global tradition, May Day began with a single, powerful idea. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. Think of it not as a call for chaos, but for balance and dignity. In the late 1800s, life for many American workers was harsh. Factories ran around the clock, 12-hour days were standard and sometimes more. There were no weekends, few protections for labor, and wages that barely paid the rent. People lived in crowded tenements, injuries on the job were common, and if you were hurt, you were out of work with no safety net. It wasn't just difficult for labor, it was unsustainable. But workers believed they could build something better, and so they organized with a simple vision: 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. On May 1st, 1886, more than 300,000 people walked off the job nationwide. In Chicago, over 40,000 marched peacefully, purposefully, and together. 3 days later, a rally in Haymarket Square continued to call for reform. It was calm, there were speeches, music, families gathering. But as police moved to disperse the crowd, a bomb was thrown. Panic followed, and gunfire rang out. 7 police officers and at least 4 civilians were killed. The bomber was never located, but the consequences were swift. 8 labor organizers were arrested, most who had little to do with the violence. 4 were even executed. 1 took their own life. The trial was widely criticized, even at the time, lacking due process, yet their memory would help shape the future of labor rights. The Haymarket Affair became a turning point, not just in the United States, but around the world. In 1889, May 1st was declared International Workers' Day. Today it is observed on every continent. It's a day to remember hard-won gains, to renew the call for fairness, equity, and shared prosperity. But in the US, the memory of Haymarket faded. In 1894, Congress established Labor Day in September, a quieter holiday meant to unite, not confront. Yet in Chicago, the story of May Day lives on. Each May 1st, people still gather at Haymarket Square, not just to remember the past, but to imagine what's next. Because challenges remain for labor, whether it's safe working conditions, fair pay, or adapting to a rapidly changing economy, the conversation continues. It reminds us that reform is possible when we come together and speak with clarity and purpose.
So you probably have maybe 30 core interest groups, and how it goes is that each interest group basically has a spread of signs at the front, and then people behind it with additional signs. They usually have somebody that's doing call and respond, okay? So the call and respond is the kind of signifier of the chants that give that movement its cohesion, per se. And these chants, they don't just reflect in Chicago politics, they reflect at the national level, like the footage that you'll see that we're shooting in New York right now. They also reflect at the international level, and in Chicago specifically, we also have a lot of Latino political driven action. So there are quite a few signs that are actually written in Spanish or chants that are said in Spanish. I definitely think the Palestinian plight is lower down the kind of stack of priorities with this broader group. But again, like, there is like no cohesion through the movement. There are so many different types of rhetoric, or like this sign says impeach and remove, which is like very domestic. And it's interesting because some of the socialist parties have told me that the way that they fight for labor is from an internationalist lens. But then when you look at their signs, it's domestic politics. So basically we're coming down West Washington Boulevard from Union Park, which is now about a mile behind us probably. And the march is making its way down to Grant Park, where it'll reconvene for probably like another 2 or 3 hours. But you know, if you want to structure an opposition against a party that's holding power or against individuals that are holding power, you do at some point have to achieve a coordinated bloc. If you don't have a coordinated bloc, it's almost impossible to provide any kind of meaningful pushback or opposition. That's kind of what we're seeing, is like something that is more of a parade than a cohesive, consolidated opposition movement. One of the things that people are organizing around today is the idea of International Workers' Day. And I've talked to some of the different leadership in the labor type political factions. To me, a lot of the rhetoric I'm hearing from labor is in the fourth industrial era, right? So that is basically the onset of the Industrial Revolution. And one of the issues I think that we have with this kind of like fourth industrial era is that the machines took some of the things that we would do manually and they started to automate them. And you know, like, I don't know, drilling a hole, or even digging a hole, or putting a bolt on a car, or some kind of hardware like that. Look, that's the fourth industrial wave, right? That's the Industrial Revolution. But the technology is getting smarter. It's trying to consolidate intelligence into these really advanced computational applications. So just think of like a computer system is running millions, sometimes billions of thought processes per second, and it's arriving at conclusions using like very firm strings of logic, okay? That way that we're consolidating these processes into the computational systems, it's very different than what we saw in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you know, through to today, where if you're trying to protect labor or you're looking out for labor, blue collar is changing. Blue collar is not the guy that goes and bangs a nail into a railroad tie. I think that the blue collar worker is going to evolve into a knowledge worker, and that we're going to start skilling blue collar workers in what we would consider like a lower wage, more repetitive type of knowledge work. So I think there is a emergence of a new blue collar worker, and I don't think that the labor movement is really prepared to face that head on. I do think for like labor to be effective for the next, 30 or 50 years, it's really going to have to like get full comprehension on like what what is this next industrial wave like, this fifth industrial wave, which is a very different architecture than the fourth industrial wave.
This democracy has secured opportunities for generations. Whether you're black, brown, white, Asian, wherever you come from, it's been this democracy that has worked to secure opportunities for working people to build a life, to build families, to build businesses, and to build a society. Now we know that over these last 100 days, that the fight to defend our democracy did not begin when Donald Trump was elected. And that our democracy has been under attack for some time now. Going after our public schools, politicians going after public housing, politicians going after health care. But one thing that I know for sure, that because we have the strength that is out here today, we're going to protect the interest of working people and stand up and defend the evolution of our democracy. Are you with me?
Okay, so we're now here in Grant Park, but I did want to tell everyone that we confirmed what I thought. There's like 10,000 different messages, and one of the things that you have to consider when you're marching and organizing and protesting is that people are not that sticky, so you can only retain their attention for so long before they kind of like lose interest in the movement. And one of the tough things about humans is they can't think about 10,000 things at once. They really need like one or two things to focus on. And so I think that is actually what threatens the strength of this movement through the summer, is that there's too many messages. One process that people try to take to like consolidate messages, and you're seeing a little bit of this, is they create like a form of nationalism. So in the form of nationalism, the national identity becomes the priority, and then the key actors will define who fits into that form of nationalism. And like then they'll obviously define the policy aims, and what happens is when you fold into a form of nationalism, you end up marginalizing all the minority group political interest, right? Actually, it becomes really hard for minorities to compete in an environment that has nationalistic tendencies, whether that nationalism is on the left or the right. One of the ways the party in power will increase coordination challenges is through political repression. And if anything, if just the act of saying what you might do, the threat of retaliation or repression, even the threat can place fear in people's hearts and create those costs that are enough to prevent them from mobilizing.